One of the slogans that I lived by for years, in fact, everyone needs to eat in restaurants, but not everyone needs to own a restaurant.
Chris Tripoli, where's the coolest place you traveled to?
Right in the middle of the Caribbean on the island of Antigua. The people there were incredibly nice, and the weather is just so relaxing. It just made work feel so differently.
What is it about the restaurant space and the hospitality space in general that you really love working in, and what's drawn you to it over the last few decades that you've been doing this?
I'm just a lifer in this industry. I got involved in working with food, and I just thought, this is really fantastic. It's a people business. You enjoy serving people, but you do this because you must enjoy working with people.
It's a people business, but so many parts have to come together to create the whole, to have that guest experience, right?
The principle is you have to like working with people in a way that serves people.
When you come in and work on a project, like, what is the starting point?
We've got to make sure that we understand what they themselves want as the goal. But you've got to really love whatever it is that you said your goal is.
And I was like, what advice would you give to somebody who wanted to open a restaurant? He said, don't. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And if you don't love it,
if you just don't have that personal connection, I don't know, it's going to be too hard down the line.
Hey y'all, how we doing? We are back for another episode of Hospitable. And today we have a really cool guest, somebody who has decades of experience in the hospitality industry, Chris Tripoli. He's worked as a concept developer, owner, operator, restaurant consultant. He's created award-winning restaurant concepts, consulted on a wide variety of projects across the world, and developed successful food service programs for things like airports, parks, and theaters, all the way to medical centers and fine dining. And so I'm really excited to kind of chat kind of this whole landscape, right? If we talk about restaurant and hospitality tech. So Chris, welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rob. Happy to be here.
Yeah, one of the things before we kind of jump in, I know that you have gotten to travel the world doing what you love. And if I'm not mistaken, you've gotten to do some really cool projects in, US, Mexico, and Canada, but also the Caribbean and the Middle East. Talk to me, how do you, where's the coolest place you travel to? And what are some of the differences that you have to take into account when you're traveling, especially places like the Caribbean and the Middle East, where maybe the culture is a little bit different, especially when it comes to restaurant, and how you've been able to kind of navigate those waters? I think that'd be a great place to start.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those fantastic memories I have there. I've been very fortunate in order to work with some really interesting groups that just happen to be, scattered around the world. It's hard to pick a favorite, but you know what, though? One of the most pleasant places that I ever worked was right in the middle of the Caribbean on the island of Antigua. I wish I was able to have gone there more for pleasure, because, just because you're in a beautifully pleasurable atmosphere, if you're there to work, you pretty much only see your hotel room and work, the site, the restaurant, the meeting with clients, and bingo, when you're done working, you fly home. But the people there were incredibly nice, and obviously, just being around the Caribbean, and the weather is just so relaxing. It just made work feel so differently. But
I call it that island lifestyle. When you're when you're in that island lifestyle, everything just feels a little bit more, I don't know, easy, fun.
And it is challenging. You made that point. That's to go back to that point. It is a little challenging when you're brought in because of a certain expertise that they're wanting, either development, systems, operations, brand improvement, these kinds of principles that a lot of smaller growing restaurant groups are looking for. But then you find yourself in an area where you are without any purveyor connections. You're in the Middle East, for example, like we did a lot of work in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and bouncing around to working with a 2-unit company that was really a fantastic story. They were in Muscat, Oman. So you're there and you're trying to provide what they're needing, but you're learning at the same time because the guest profiles are totally different, and their expectations are totally different. And you're trying to find purveyor relationships that you don't have. So I enjoyed the challenge, but it was a bit of a curveball.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, it's always fun when you get to travel for work, because it does open up a lot of unique, cool opportunities. But sometimes because you are there for work, you don't get to experience everything the way you do when you're traveling just for pleasure. And so sometimes that does, change the memories a little bit, right? Travel is such a sentient memory, and we have these experiences, so it's really cool. Well, I know we kind of just jumped in, but you have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I know you also have this amazing corner booth podcast where you interview different restaurants and do some cool things. So, how did you fall into the restaurant space? And I think maybe kind of what is it about the restaurant space and the hospitality space in general that you really love working in, and what's drawn you to it over the last few decades that you've been doing this?
Well, yeah, just to give you a really quick summary, I'm like many others that you may have met. I'm just a lifer in this industry. I started working in it as a teenager and I pretty much never left. I know absolutely nothing about how other industries work because from the age of 15, I started bussing tables, I got involved in kitchen work, and something just clicked. One of the biggest things that clicked, and I've tried to remember this for years, just to try to always go back and do what he did, is that I was really well mentored. I don't
Hmm.
even think I knew to call it that at the time. But the general manager of my very first steakhouse, seafood, very high end restaurant I was in, he could just tell that I was interested.
Hmm.
And so he he kind of showed me and he brought me in and I was invited to come in every day after work. And I remember doing my homework sitting in their office while Daryl Anthony, the bookkeeper, was taking reservations. He
Hmm.
would show me how we did reservations. I was doing daily reports, checking in deliveries. I loved the way the restaurant worked. I
Yeah.
got involved in working with the food and I just thought, this is really fantastic the way you cook in the kitchen and the way people just had to click. I think
Hmm.
that's probably one of the things that was one of my earlier memories and the one that I still treasure today, even though it's been years and years and years longer. And that's that it's a people business.
Yeah.
You enjoy serving people, but you do this because you must enjoy working with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought maybe all businesses were like this. Imagine my surprise when I learned that they weren't. But, I'm in this kitchen. There's young people, old people, different colors, different languages. No one cared. Everyone's working and you fit and you do the job well and everyone's happy with each other. It can be a good experience.
Yeah.
If you don't fit, you don't do the job well, then you're creating a poor work environment, and that's something that we learned later. We really had to spend a lot of time on in this industry, and that was the work environment and the management staff relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think every team, at every level and company, right, there needs to be some sort of process and relationship and work environment. But I think really when you look at hospitality and we're thinking like people serving people, especially in like a kitchen or at a hotel, it has to run at a different level because at the end of the day, you're working with other people for an experience, whether that's to have a meal, dining experience, a check-in experience, and so it just feels a lot different because if something is off, it affects everything.
Yes,
In a lot of work
yes.
environments, if something's off, you can always kind of counteract it, you can course correct, et cetera. But if you're in the middle of a lunch rush, I mean, I grew up when I was 14, my first job was bussing tables at a all you can eat pizza buffet. My dad was the manager there. And if you're in the middle of the lunch rush and you don't properly plan, and all of a sudden you need pizzas for the whole line and you've got 40 pizzas coming out, you got things dropping, you're trying to cut and serve. And it does, if you don't have that down to a T in the science, it affects so much. If a plate's not ready, it's too cold, too hot, whatever. And that's what I think so cool about restaurants. And so when you kind of looking at your background as you cut down these things, that's where I think so many things could go wrong. It's a people business, but so many parts have to come together to create the whole to have that guest experience, right?
Absolutely. And as I went through my career from getting into management, and then I was very fortunate that I met a couple people that were interested in an idea of mine. And so I got to own my own restaurants for a while. And then when I moved into developing restaurants for other people and starting to consult and write and get involved in the website, which led to the podcast. Anyway, all of that stuff, the principle never really changed. The
Yeah.
principle is you have to like working with people in a way that serves people.
Yeah.
And uh, if that principle is the foundation in this business, you'll find a way of getting the right services, the right uh, theories, the right marketing and technologies. But if the people aren't fitting, then we're going to have a hard time with the other parts of the other pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. So I want to get into this. When we talk about the concept of a restaurant, right? You've been an owner operator and consulting on these, and when we look at starting a restaurant and we're getting things kicked off, there's a lot of moving parts. There's the staffing element to it, there's the menu, the branding, and there's the technology of it. Where do you start when you come in and work on a project? Like, what is the starting point?
You
and
know,
and and
that's a very good question, Rob, because I mean, everything you mentioned is important. Obviously, we've got to talk about the product. We have to develop a point of difference. There's going to be systems and technologies. There's the finance side. There's finding the right real estate side. But after a little while, I found that the most important thing first, if you're developing a concept or helping somebody open their first restaurant, is we've got to make sure that we understand what they themselves want as the goal. And
Mhm.
I don't mind telling you, sometimes in that discussion, it gets a little uncomfortable because you see that what their goal was maybe is going to be difficult in order to fit. In other words, there have been a few people that I've actually talked out of the business because they just saw this as a quick financial avenue.
Yeah.
I went, really? That's why you're going to do this? Yeah, I see these restaurants, they're busy. I want to get my piece of the pie. I'm going to jump in. I've got a couple of investors. We're going to do two or three really quick. We're going to sell and get out.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm thinking, well, I'm glad we're having this conversation first because this is not really an industry for that. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, you can't develop long-term wealth. You
Yeah.
can, and it doesn't mean that you can create a brand and sell it. Of course, you can. But what I want to hear first is somebody's leading with passion.
Yeah.
I'll help develop a process out of that, but you've got to really love whatever it is that you said your goal is. Are you really looking at opening your first restaurant from a culinary point of view
Mhm.
because you've got an expression that you want to put forward because of your food training? I get it. If you want to get into the business mainly because you're it's a family extension and you're taking these South American recipes that you were raised as a kid and you want to introduce them to your particular, I get it.
Mhm.
Okay, now we can start working on the other pieces, but what's the point? And the point really needs to be connected with a passion.
Yeah. It's really funny. I have a friend who was a Michelin, who was had a couple of Michelin star restaurants in the UK. And I remembered I interviewed him on another podcast that I did, and I was like, "What advice would you give to somebody who wanted to open a restaurant?" He said, "Don't. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, and if you don't love it,
Yeah,
And this guy has a Michelin star and multiple
right,
from two different restaurants, from the one he worked at to when he started, and that's from a Michelin star chef, and he actually made the transition to technology after his career of actually cooking because he says the same thing. He's like, I love cooking, but like when I was running the restaurant, there were so many other pieces that I wasn't able to be in love with the cooking aspect, right? And like
right,
that's where I think these things like passion has to come through when it comes to restaurant. And I mean, if you look at McDonald's and this origin story, we've all seen the documentary and all see the things like when you see those things happen, that's why the Arches meant something to somebody. It was built out of passion. You franchise because you love the burgers, you love the fries, you loved the drive up experience. It was a place to go to on a Friday night. Yeah, obviously there was money that was made to it, and it became very commercial down the road. But if you look at all the origin stories from the best restaurants, whether it's as a red sauce joint that's you know home cooked American meals, home cooked American Italian meals, right, versus like a pizza restaurant, and those are the things that I think really shine through. And I still
oh
remember what I
yeah.
loved when I
Oh,
worked at
you're
that
right on the
restaurant.
money. And I think the friend that you're referring to would probably love the slogan. One of the slogans that I lived by for years, in fact, it was on the consulting website, was one of my core beliefs was that everyone needs to eat in restaurants,
Hmm.
hopefully more often.
Hmm.
It's an industry that needs steady customers, but not everyone needs to own a restaurant.
Yeah,
And because it isn't for everyone.
yeah,
And it's a very demanding industry. If you do have that passion, it's easier to see your way through the demands. It's
yeah,
a financially tough one. We all know how tight the margins are. But again, if you're passionate about what you're doing and it brings you a high level of satisfaction, it's worth the financial risk and you'll find a way of making it through the tight margins. But
yeah,
if you just don't have that personal connection, I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know. It's going to be too hard down the line.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really interesting too, because if you think about restaurants, there's different types of restaurants too, right? There are certain restaurants that you open up in tourist locations because you're going to get tons of transient, but you're not getting really long term customers like that tourist that comes in. It's because they want to experience and they're in Times Square versus, the restaurant in Brooklyn. If you're going to go off the beaten path to Brooklyn to eat there, it's because that's an institution. And I think when we're opening those restaurants and doing those things, it's really important to understand the why behind it and the passion of the location. To
You're
are
right.
you looking for? Everyone has to eat and hopefully more often. Is it because you're wanting to create a loyal base that comes back multiple times and kind of becomes like family and eats there? Or is it a transient, like this is all about volume because it's a great location? And those are things that I think we instinctively know, but when you actually start thinking about that, it makes it really hard to figure out how do I own and operate a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
So it starts with passion, right? And looking for passion. And then we get into, I think the brand side of what does it want to be? Are you a sit down? What's your price point, right? And then you kind of get into putting in process in place. And we all know that restaurants run on a number of technology. You've got point of sale, you've got reservation, you've got accounting, you've got all these things. How do you go about evaluating the tech landscape? So let's say we got past passion and we're at a
Yeah.
place of, we know what we want to be. How do we actually evaluate, okay, what systems do we put in place? How do we pull all this together? How do we go through that evaluation process? How you teach that for restaurateurs, especially because if you're a restaurateur your whole life, you might not know all the technology that's out there and might be overwhelmed by the amount of data you can now get running a restaurant. So how do
Sure.
you go about
Sure.
that process and evaluation
Well,
process?
and yeah, that's sort of just a natural part of what we call the funneling process. Where, yeah, once we understand the concept, the passion behind it, and all the other items that we talked about, now we know what they're looking at, what their point of difference is going to be. It might be a style of service, it might be the seasonal menuing. We know a little bit more now about their size, price point, hour of operation. So then it just kind of funnels down into now, here's what are the absolute minimum to start with recommended types of technology you're going to need. And so today, of course, we're so much further along than, I can remember, decades ago where holy moly, just trying to plan, budget, and find POS that's going to help you stay current on your numbers was bulky and it was difficult. However, it is a little bit easier now, and that's really where we start. We start by going from the front and working to the back. And we'll
Hmm.
say from the front, from a customer point of view, what kind of technology is going to be helpful for us to create a guest experience? Reservation system? How are we
Hmm.
going to greet? Is this a casual counter service? In which case, these kiosks are getting popular and we're going to want to talk about those. Some people really are enjoying more about the convenience of order online, finding a specific place to go, pick up, and leave. Okay, well, let's talk about the technology to handle the online ordering, how it connects to the POS, into
Hmm.
the kitchen, and boom, to my separate to go counter. Or how we can go from the kiosk and yet still have somebody behind the counter. Or maybe it's full service, and now we want to talk about a reservation system that helps me manage the dining room, where
Hmm.
it isn't just collecting information who's coming in at 7, who's coming in at 7:15, but the cool technology that can monitor the timing of tables that can give us by different colors and messages to help me manage table turnover and make
Yeah.
the dining room manager actually more aware and smarter. So we'll get into that. But the absolute minimum, though, is a POS system that's going to be able to help you manage product and labor. This is their very first concept. We're going to be talking about how important prime cost management is because that's 60 to 65% of every dollar. And
Hmm.
so if we don't have a POS that they're going to understand is going to be kept current on item sales and labor by the hour, labor by department, and if you're not going to be looking at these reports, say at the end of every shift or at least once a day, then you're not going to be utilizing the technology that's available. And that's at a minimum.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we start. And then we go from there. I'm loving the technology that is making invoice management and payables so much easier. Money management is easier now. And the idea of having your item cost and inventory managed now. So we get into that and highly recommend it, whether you're a first timer who's casual or maybe you're more established and you're high end. That behind the scenes technology it's just almost mandatory now in order to manage your money.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because depending on the vibe you want to, right? Whether you're a quick service or a fine dining, that does change how you kind of leverage that technology. And QR codes were super popular, and I think QR codes still have a great time and place. Like when I go to the airport, I love that I
Yes.
can literally do it all and have it paid for, and it comes and I can eat quickly and run. So I know that I can run off to my plane. I'm not waiting for the check, and having that kind of like, hey, like I need the check, and they gotta take your card and swipe it and all that stuff. So How do we, like, when you think about that and we're looking at those different experiences, how does that come about, when it comes to more of a fine dining where probably less table turnover, you're there for more of an experience, you're sitting down. How do you kind of manage those conversations of what's needed versus something that's more not super quick service, but kind of middle price point? So that like 40 to 60 versus that 100 to 150. Because I feel like there's not much difference between those two spaces except for like the look and feel, right?
Right.
So how do you kind of go
And
about that process?
you made a really good point because the way I try to teach it is I try to teach a little bit more of the experiences together rather than the experiences being different.
Yeah.
Yes, when we work with more of that, what we'll call time management food service, where it is an airport or other, say, more commercial environment, yeah, QR codes, convenience all the way. The more obvious the menu is, the quicker I can order, the quicker I can pay, typically the happier I'm going to be. And that's what it's about. We want the guests to be happy. But now what we'll find is if you're fine dining and you know you're going to have a very high check average and you want that guest experience to be special. Now what we're finding is some people that are more in the casual dining are feeling like I there's certain things I guess I don't have to do. And I like the point that you were making when you said there isn't that much difference. And you know what? We teach there really isn't. Guess what? If I'm sitting and it's full service, I'm still expecting the steps of service. I'm still
Hmm.
expecting and should be deserving to feel wanted, appreciated. I should hear some suggestive selling. I should get a compliment on what I ordered. Somebody should be coming by to make sure that my experience is going well, save room for dessert. Now, if I'm only spending $45 a person versus, say, a special night and I'm spending $145 a person, those steps should still be met. That's where we started coining the phrase that it doesn't have to be a special occasion restaurant to make somebody's occasion feel special.
Yeah.
So the technology in those situations are needed, but it's all behind the scenes because you're still expecting the personal interaction. You're not really expecting to order on a QR code. Obviously, there could still be tableside handhelds.
Hmm.
Those work for ordering, and it helps time the orders in a little bit better for the kitchen.
Yeah.
If while you're ordering, I'm printing rather than take a bunch of orders. And then, like we used to, remember, then you go to the POS station, you ring them all in at one time, and then the kitchen's going, great, I got 8 tickets in 8 minutes. So, I mean, there's still some technology in full service. It's wonderful. I also like the inventory management of full
Hmm.
service. When you're talking about high end inventory, cost of product, fresh perishables, wine inventories. So now that's important, but that that doesn't show to the guest at all.
Yeah, and those are things that I think are super important from the ownership side, and this is where I think technology becomes such a really cool piece, and why restaurateurs need to understand the value of technology and the value of choosing the right things and having the right pieces to that, because there's always ways for you to kind of mitigate an operating cost, right? I know you talk about prime mark or the prime number, right? And that prime number is kind of like the building block that everything is built off of, and so when we think about also staff planning, right? On a Monday night versus Thursday night or a Friday night, right? On the weekends. And some places are more aligned to like the Monday night football game. And so also understanding the events in your area, because the restaurant's a big part of the community, and understanding how the community reacts to those type of things is also super, super important in your planning purposes. And how do you go about doing that? How do you stay abreast of all the things that are happening so you don't get slammed on a Monday when you're expecting it to be a slow night and understaffed?
Right, right. Well, see, and that's the idea. If we have this information, and we do, we have the availability of this information today, where it's coming to us during the day, it's coming to us by the hour. We can do sales by the hour. We can do sales by person now, sales by station. So it's really up to management to take a look at it and learn from it. Because what's going to help us realize Monday evenings is by making sure that we're managing by the week. And we can see what previous weeks on Mondays have been doing. And
Hmm.
as long as we stay attuned of using our information, not like we used to in the old days, where all the information went into an old database and an accountant, say on May the 10th, told us what we did well or what we didn't do well during the month of April.
Hmm.
See, those days are long gone.
Yeah.
Profit and loss statements are no longer information. technology's taught us that they're more confirmation of hopefully what you already know. Because to your point, you want to plan your labor week by week. You want to
Mhm.
know your sales week by week. You're looking at weather forecasts, community involvement, special things that might be going on that might be impacting my particular business, and you're scheduling that. You're coming up with a revenue goal and a labor target week by week.
Yeah.
So by the end of the month, the best management, the best restaurants today are managed week by week.
Yeah.
And they know that after 4 weeks, they hit a period goal. Yay. We're not waiting for P&Ls to give us that information anymore.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think there's so much things that we can kind of glean from that. I remember back even, 20 years ago when I was working in the restaurant, like in the summertime, we knew that if it was going to rain, and it was a high chance of rain because we had an all-you-can-eat pizza buffet with a game room.
Oh
That
boy.
most people's backup plans, if the pool is not not available or the theme park is closed because of the rain, we're going to be flooded, right? So we were always checking the forecast the night before or the week of, and then looking at the night before. And it's like, hey, there's a 60, 70, 80, 90% chance of rain. We better be ready for a busy day tomorrow. And those things are easier to start tracking and managing and following. And I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle when
Hmm.
you need to know who's coming into your restaurant, why they're coming in, what's the experience they're looking for, and what are the existential factors that could impact that.
And
And if you
this
don't know
used to
that,
be difficult.
yeah.
Everything you're talking about, I can remember in the early days of owning a restaurant, I had managers, we were doing this manually pretty much. I mean, we had these older POS. And in order for us to learn about what you just talked about, we were actually going and doing hourly readings. So we were looking at customer counts
Hmm.
and tickets in the kitchen from between 8 and 9. So to help us realize about how long does it taking for tables to turn later in the night versus earlier in the night. And then that would help us with, say, things like scheduling staff, expecting when we're going to odal, the option to release the earlies
Hmm.
stations. And all of that is so much easier to know now. We actually had 18 column. Boy, I'm really aging myself now. We had 18 column, the old ledgers, and the
Yeah.
managers were writing in the hourly report for sales, staff, customer count, PPA check average, and it helped us in our weekly manager meetings to learn then about Tuesday afternoons versus Wednesdays,
Yeah.
Fridays, the early afternoon busy happy hour and early meals because the people are getting off of work, on their way home. So we had to kind of do some of this manual malarkey that now is just please take full advantage of the technology that's available and have your managers learn from it. So much of that, we don't have to go to the POS anymore. It's all handheld.
Yeah.
Bingo. And I say, use it, turn it on, walk through the restaurant and knowing, go ahead and set those timers to manage your utilities and dim your lights. I mean, come on, it's there.
Yeah, it's there for a reason. So that's a great kind of transition into you have this amazing technology that gives us all this data, and we can easily consume that. How should restaurants and restaurant operators be managing that? Is it daily meetings or weekly meetings? Like, what is that cadence to actually look at this and really be very insightful and thoughtful? Because if too much data can also be it's a blessing and a curse, right? And if you
Right.
don't know how to look at the data and really understand that to turn that into insight. So what is your kind of best recommendation? Is it weekly meetings, daily meetings? How do you kind of coach on managing the data that's coming in and leveraging that on a regular basis with your teams?
Okay. That's absolutely a great picture because it helps us go through what are the priorities to manage a shift. And seeing all those things have their place. Should we have a weekly meeting? Yes. We don't have to be over meeting, but I do think that key staff and managers should have the same time once a week where they sit and they have a short agenda where they're always reviewing the same things. You don't just show up with a cup of coffee and a legal pad and one guy does all the talking and the other three guys are just acting like they're listening. They're really here for the free coffee and then they go back and nothing changes. Everyone needs to participate and they need to know that we're planning things like revenue and key things like labor management. How about guest comments? How about people in training? How about the labor, the schedule, the cost, marketing, special occasions? That's about it. 6 or 7 key things, and they need to be looked at weekly. Then at the next week, we can judge ourselves and hold ourselves accountable for how well did we do on those 7 or 8 key things that we said we were going to be doing. Did we hit our targets? Did we schedule correctly? Did we finish, our people in training? Did the event, work the way it should? Those are the kinds of things weekly meetings do have a time and place. Now, over information, over meeting has no longer a time or place in our industry. One of the best things I like to do when I walk into a restaurant is lock the damn office door. Who's serving a customer in an office? That's what
Yeah.
I'd like to know. Get out there, live on the floor, because between the information that's on your handheld and what you can do by going to the POS, you're informed.
Yeah.
By touring and moving, managers that stand are not managing.
Yeah.
They're spectators.
Yeah.
Move, do the figure eight, go from the door, go touch the tables, talk to the guest, walk through the bar, go into the kitchen, time your tickets, go back to the front door and do it again. If you're moving, you're managing, and the technology's in your hand. So if you
Yeah.
want to check something, you can check it. When you no longer need to go sit in the office uh, in order to learn something or check on something.
Yeah.
So that's it. Now there is still, there's still this weekly ties into the period. The period still ties into, say, quarterly evaluations. Everyone should have an annual plan.
Hmm.
So we've got expectations of what we're expecting for revenue, for expenses. But an annual plan is a lot more than a budget. It's a plan. It's what are the owners expecting from the
Hmm.
guest experience. So how are we going to review that? How are we going to do a menu audit? How are we going to do seasonal menuing? When do we do that? When do we do our key staff evaluations? Or write it in. When do we do it? Are we going to be branching out? Maybe this year we're going to be building more of our third-party delivery, our off-premise catering. So you kind of plan what you're going to be doing and when you're going to be doing it, and that helps build a budget to work from. So some technology really helps us with our annual planning,
Yeah.
our quarterly evaluations, but it still breaks down to week by week and shift by shift ways of succeeding today.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I think it's really really impactful to understand how do we leverage data and how do we utilize the technology that's there to easily maneuver and still plan accordingly and manage accordingly day by day, week by week, month by month, but not let it overly consume us. All right. So like locking the office door, right? We're
Exactly.
not letting it overly consume us
Right.
and taking
And it
away from the
also
experience.
helps you put your focus where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Because if we take a look at the bigness, let's say I'm a manager today and, I know that we have an annual plan. This unit is supposed to be doing, say, $3 million a year. Okay. How does that divide down to help me do my Wednesday shift better?
Yeah.
Well, it really doesn't. So some information, the massiveness of the information doesn't really help. But if I know that this week my goal is this,
Yeah.
and in order to do that, we need to have a customer per person check average of this. So I'm working Wednesday, I should have X amount of customers. Where am I at? Uh, am I above goal? Am I below goal? How is my per person check average? Should I be more on the floor listening to the staff, building that check, suggesting desserts? Am I on target? Am I off target? Once we build it, break it down to daily and by the shift, I can do a better job.
Love that. Yeah, and that's super impactful and a great way to look at it. As I know we're getting close to time, and we could probably spend hours talking about this, and it's a lot of fun. When you look at 2025, right, as we're recording this, it's just the end of Q3, starting Q4. A lot of things going, and there's a lot of opportunity to grow next year. And I think you know technology is growing, the online ordering, all these things are growing. What are you excited about in 2025? What are the things that you've kind of kept a finger on the pulse of that you're excited for as trends of 2025 coming along next year?
Oh God, great point. Well, the first one that comes to mind, I think, is probably the biggest point, and because it transgresses all segments. We're hearing this from larger full service chains, and we're hearing it from, say, the smaller limited menu counter guys, all the way down to, say, the recent change in what we're hearing about from, big boy international coffee house Starbucks.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to permeate. It's going to start late this year and go all next year, and it's going to be the rediscovery of the guest, because sometimes going towards cost concerns, which we've had tremendous amount of, supply chain issues, labor challenge, everything that was post COVID brought us to a certain point of paying more attention to very good points, but points of cost, points of efficiency, points of business. And in some cases, people have over divulged into that area. We're kind of overblown into that. And we've found that we can't lose the war of the guest experience.
Mhm.
So I think we're going to find next year is going to be a great year of balance. You don't want to lose the edge on buying, better inventory control, managing the numbers, use of technology to save time and create better efficiencies. But um, that's not in itself success. That's to create a better opportunity for us to improve our operations. And our operations are going to be measured by the improved guest experience. We've gotten very fortunate, Rob, in that the guest has defined value as their number one thing, man.
Mhm.
Some people value a tremendous amount of convenience, so they're willing to pay for that packaged convenience, getting it at my home. I open up, I have restaurant food. I know it costs a little bit more, but I want that convenience. People value their experience in a restaurant if it was worth their time. So
Yeah.
I think what we're going to see, we've heard it from the big guys. We've been hearing it from the Dardens and we've heard it from Starbucks. We're going to hear it, I think, from the smaller independents on how do I measure my guest experience? Do they value their time here? So we're gonna be seeing a lot of that, I think, in this next year.
Well, that's exciting because what we wanted to talk about here was the guest experience and how do we create a guest experience. And so I think this is going to be super tactile for all those next year as we head into 2025, as we round out Q4 going into next year, the focus on guest experience and how do we use
Yeah.
technology to create that guest experience is it's a great key takeaway for this episode. Chris, I know I could talk for you forever, but how can the folks find you? How do they get in touch with you? How do they learn more? If they want to reach out and contact you.
Oh, I'd love it. Love it if they would. We could talk more about these principles or other things at therestaurantclinic.com. Therestaurantclinic.com is the place I would refer everyone. I'm a principal in that group, small group, just working with restaurants, helping with concept and developing managers to become more efficient, creating more awareness and better training of staff. So, anybody want to talk about any of that, go to therestaurantclinic.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put in the restaurantclinic.com in the show notes. So all you got to do is click on that, pull it up, and they'll be able to be directed to the website. I'll also put a link to the Corner Booth podcast, which is, I know your podcast, Chris. I've listened to a couple episodes, love it.
Oh,
For those,
good. That's
for
nice.
those,
Thank you.
yeah, you bet. Absolutely. So put that there. If you enjoyed this conversation, I promise you'll love the Corner Booth. So go check it out. Chris, thank you so much for being a guest today. I really appreciated the time, the energy, and the insights. Thank you, my friend.
Oh, Rob, thank you. It has been a joy.
You bet. Well, all thank you for listening. And that's another episode of Hospitable. If you could, as always, be a tier one, like, subscribe, rate, review. If you have guests that you want to highlight on the podcast, if you have topics that you want us to cover, let us know. All my information is also in the show notes. And until next time, be well.